2022, an undefeated season for the Georgia Bulldogs, 15-0, capped off with another national championship to go back-to-back, the first team to do so in the college football playoff era. Now, there were a lot of high points during the season, a couple of questionable ones. Stick around to find out my 7 favorite games from last season. Let them know, Kirby.
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.
To kick off my countdown, we have to start at number 7 with the Florida Gators. Now, I'm a proud card-carrying member of Generation X. I came of age in the 90s and saw the Steve Spurrier era at Florida up close, and it was painful to behold. Now, to me, Florida, without question, is Georgia's top rival, and any win over the Gators is mandatory for me to be truly happy for any given season. Now, any win against Florida will do. But believe me when I tell you that the Dogs can't beat Florida bad enough. With that as the backdrop, you can understand why I start every Georgia football season with the same list of goals for the team as a fan. Beat Florida, win the SEC East, win the SEC. Now the wording on these goals will change a little bit as the conference adds new members, but the bottom line will remain the same. It all starts with whipping the Gators. That is why the 42-20 win in the game in Jacksonville, most likely soon to move on campus, makes my list of favorite games for 2022. Coming in at number 6 on my list of favorite games from 2022, the Oregon Ducks. Coming into the 2022 season, pretty much everybody expected Georgia to be pretty good. I mean, they were the reigning national champions, but the splattering that happened at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta to kick off the season, well, that served notice to pretty much everyone, even the most hardcore Bulldog fans, that they might need to recalibrate what they thought was going to happen for the 2022 season. Kirby's Dogs took the field that day in Atlanta and put the college football world on notice that a repeat was a very real possibility for Georgia, even with the losses sustained from the previous year's national championship squad. The Dogs' speed, precision, power, all on full display as they blistered the Ducks on their way to a 49-3 win. From the opening kickoff, Kirby's squad dominated Oregon. Georgia could get whatever they wanted any way they wanted it, and provided a stark reality check for new Oregon head coach and former Georgia defensive coordinator Dan Lanning in his Ducks debut. Number 5, the SEC championship game against the LSU Tigers. Like I mentioned above, one of my annual goals for the Dogs is to compete for and win the SEC championship. And the Dogs found themselves back in Atlanta to book in the 2022 regular season with a chance to do just that. Much like their previous trip to Atlanta to open the season against Oregon, Georgia was on fire against the Tigers and looked dominant, en route to a 50-30 victory and an SEC title. Kirby's second as head coach of the Bulldogs. So, of course, if you hang 50 on the board, there's going to be a couple of fireworks along the way. And this game was highlighted by a couple of plays that will live forever in Georgia lore. The first came early in the game when junior Nazir Stackhouse blocked a 32-yard field goal attempt and Chris Smith patiently waited before picking up the football and racing 96 yards for a touchdown to give the Dogs a 7-0 lead. Georgia would go to the half leading 35-10, tying an SEC championship game record for the most points scored in the first half. Later in the game, Georgia standout defensive lineman Jalen Carter sacked LSU's quarterback Jaden Daniels, wrapping him up with one arm, lifting him up to the sky, and then using his other hand to point to the sky with the number 1 to tell the world exactly where the Dogs stood in the landscape of college football, in a moment that, without a doubt, has become iconic and will live on in Georgia lore forever. Coming in at number 4 for one of my favorite games from the 2022 season, the Missouri Tigers. Wait, what? Did I just say the Missouri Tigers? Yeah, I did. The midseason struggle trip to Middle Earth checks in at number 4 on my favorite games list of 2022. Now, admittedly, this game was not pretty. It was not yet another sparkling example of the Dogs' dominance in what would eventually become another national championship season. But I argue, if this game had not played out the way it did, the Dogs don't win their second consecutive national title. There was a lot working against Georgia that night, a team that was banged up, playing on the road, in the toughest conference in the nation, on a cold night with a fan base that was invested, and created one of the toughest atmospheres the Dogs would play in all season. A couple of things leap to mind about this game that absolutely landed on my favorite games list for the 2022 season. The Dogs' young defense really came of age that night in Columbia, repeatedly forcing field goal attempts to keep Georgia in the game. The play that exemplifies this gritty effort for me came in the second quarter, when freshman Malachi Starks walked down Missouri's Cody Schrader, tackling him on the 1-yard line after a 63-yard gain. He could have given up and just let him score the touchdown, but that's just not who he was, that's not who this team was, and it made all the difference in the game. The Dogs would force one of 5 Harrison Mevis field goals in the game, and this is a game that Georgia would go on to win by just 4 points. So the play made by the freshman All-America proved to be gigantic. The other key to the game that night, and to Georgia's season as a whole, was how Georgia's leaders stepped up and handled adversity that night in Missouri. At one point after the half, Darnell Washington went up to the coaches and straight up told them, "Hey, run the ball behind me. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make some room so we can move the ball." Washington also had a couple of big catches in the game, and both of those catches were on drives that led to scores for the Dogs. Another leader that stepped up that night was a banged-up Kenny McIntosh, who was dealing with a deep thigh bruise that he had suffered inside the 5-yard line against Kent State the week prior. Down 10 in the fourth quarter, it was McIntosh ripping off big runs and punishing defenders as Georgia battled back to win the game 26-22 and remain undefeated. If you like what we're doing here at Damn Beast Media and you're getting value from the work, please subscribe to the channel here on YouTube and like and share the video with your friends. There's no easier way to support the channel. It's free, and it really helps us grow the channel and what's proving to be the most loyal community of damn good dogs here on YouTube. Be sure to check out our website. You'll find a link in the description below. There's lots of great dogs content there as well, including the How About the Fucking Dawgscast, a Georgia Bulldog football podcast that you can find exclusively here at A Damn Beast Media. Thank you for being here. None of what we do would be possible without your support. At number 3, we have the national championship game against the TCU Horned Frogs. Sitting at 14-0 after a victory over Ohio State in the Peach Bowl on New Year's Eve, Georgia rolled into the national championship game against TCU and absolutely obliterated the Big 12's first representative in the title game, defeating the Horned Frogs 65-7 to go 15-0 and claim their second consecutive national title, becoming the first team in college football to win back-to-back national titles in the college football playoff era. To say the Dogs dominated does not effectively capture what happened on the field that night to the Horned Frogs. Georgia's victory was truly historic. The Dogs' 58-point blowout win in the college football playoff finale marked the largest margin of victory in bowl game history. It was more than just a victory or another championship. It was a statement that Georgia is the king of college football until further notice. How about them Dogs? Hey, Utah! Give me 2. Number 2 on my countdown of my favorite games from the 2022 season was the regular season game of the year, the Tennessee Volunteers and the Georgia Bulldogs in Athens. Now the Vols rolled into the game, the story of the season, a media darling, and ranked number 1 in the initial college football playoff rankings. Georgia was ranked number 1 in the AP poll at the time, setting up a heretofore unheard of number 1 versus number 1 matchup. College game day was on the ground in Athens, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric. The Dogs proved they were more than up to the challenge, though. For the second time in 2022, Georgia showed the world that they possessed that ultra-rare ability to flip the switch and find another gear for the biggest games. The Dogs dominated Tennessee. The 27-13 final score was not indicative of the physical beatdown that Georgia administered between the hedges that day. Tennessee was lucky that the rains came in because based on what we saw in the first half, the Dogs could have named their score. Feeling disrespected coming into the game, Georgia left absolutely no doubt afterwards that they were the class of college football and forced the national media to acknowledge as much. And at number 1, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I mean, it had to be this one, right? My number 1 game pulls together everything that makes the sport great. The college football playoff, New Year's Eve, and a matchup that the college football world had been waiting for 2 years to see, Ohio State taking on Georgia. this one would live up to the hype. This was a heavyweight bout, with the combatants trading punches throughout. But when the money was on the table at winning time, the Georgia Bulldogs showed themselves to be the better team. The Dogs made play after play, dominating the fourth quarter, outscoring the Buckeyes 18-3. For the game, Georgia had more rushing yards on fewer attempts, 50 more passing yards on the same number of completions and attempts, more total yards on fewer plays, and made enough defensive stops to win the game, proving once again what they had demonstrated throughout the course of the season. The Dogs were the best team that night, the most complete team in the sport, and the best team in college football in 2022. So there you have it. My favorite games from the 2022 season for the back-to-back and reigning national champion Georgia Bulldogs. Do you love my list? Do you hate it? Drop me a comment below and let me know. Share this video with your friends because I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks too. Until next time, go Dogs.
So how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.
We will not be hunted at the University of Georgia. I can promise you that.